A millionaire saw twin girls crying on the street. He decided to take them home. The next day, a woman knocked on his door. The rain hammered against the windshield like an insistent reminder of Nathan's state of mind. Relentless, consuming, and impossible to ignore. The wipers swished in a rhythmic monotony, but the deluge was too much to clear. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening under the pressure. Outside, the streets of New York were a blur of wet asphalt and distant neon glows. The city's usual chaos muted under the storm's weight. Nathan Hayes was 35, wealthy enough to own half the skyscrapers that loomed in the rain-soaked skyline, yet lonelier than he had ever been. His tailored coat, draped over the seat beside him, still carried the faint scent of cigars and bourbon from his last futile social engagement, a hollow attempt to fill the void left by a loss too painful to name. He turned a corner and slowed his car instinctively. Something caught his eye under the flickering light of a solitary street lamp, a motionless shape on the sidewalk. His chest tightened as he leaned forward, peering through the rivulets of rain streaming down the glass. Two small figures sat huddled together, barely more than shadows, their frail outlines shivering in the cold. Nathan pulled over, cutting the engine. The absence of the car's hum brought a deafening stillness, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the storm, the cold biting through his shirt almost immediately. As he approached, the scene sharpened. Two girls, no older than 7, clung to each other under the meager shelter of a tattered jacket. Their hair hung in wet, stringy tangles over pale faces streaked with tears and rainwater. The older-looking one, her arms wrapped protectively around the other, lifted her head as Nathan approached. Her eyes were wary, piercing even in their exhaustion. "Are you all right?" Nathan inquired, maintaining a low voice to avoid causing any alarm. The older girl stiffened, her grip on her sister tightening. The younger one peeked out from the folds of the jacket, her gaze darting between Nathan and the street, as if gauging an escape route. They didn't answer, only shrank further into each other, like wounded animals. Nathan crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level, despite the rain seeping into his clothes. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Nathan." He hesitated, then added, "You shouldn't be out here in this weather." The older girl finally spoke, her voice brittle but defiant. "We don't have anywhere else." Nathan's chest tightened at the words. He glanced at the younger girl, who was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. Without thinking, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over their shoulders. "This isn't a place for you to stay," he said softly. "Come with me. I'll get you warm, dry, and something to eat." The older girl's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Why would you help us?" "Because no one else is," Nathan said simply, standing and holding out his hand. The rain blurred the edges of his figure, but his voice carried a sincerity the girls weren't accustomed to hearing. After a moment of silence, the older girl looked at her sister. After a silent exchange, they nodded in desperation rather than trust. Nathan helped them to their feet, his hands brushing against their ice-cold fingers. They were so small, so fragile. It made his heart ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. He opened the passenger door and ushered them inside, the car's warmth enveloping them immediately. The older girl pulled the jacket tighter around her sister, who leaned against her shoulder, her eyes fluttering closed with exhaustion. "What are your names?" Nathan gently inquired as he started the car, his voice barely audible above the hum of the heater. The older girl hesitated, then replied, "I'm Julia." "She's Judy." Julia carefully chose her words, clipping her tone as if she was afraid to say too much. Judy murmured something inaudible and nestled closer to her sister, her frailty more pronounced under the dim interior light. Nathan didn't push for more. Instead, he focused on driving, his hands steady on the wheel, despite the storm outside. In the back seat, Julia's guarded eyes occasionally flicked toward him, watching every move with the wariness of someone accustomed to betrayal. By the time they reached Nathan's mansion, the rain had eased to a gentle patter. Margaret, his longtime housekeeper, met them at the door, her brows knitting in concern as she took in the girls' drenched and disheveled state. "They need warmth and food," Nathan said briskly, "and someone to look after them." Margaret nodded, her voice warm with reassurance as she ushered the girls inside. "Come on, dears. Let's get you sorted." Nathan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching as Julia and Judy disappeared down the hall with Margaret. Despite the storm outside, the house had never felt so full. The soft glow of the hallway light cast elongated shadows on the walls of Nathan's mansion, a stark contrast to the storm still rumbling outside. The heavy oak doors seemed to swallow the sound of distant thunder, leaving an eerie quiet. Margaret ushered Judy and Julia toward the guest bathroom, her footsteps light yet purposeful. Nathan lingered in the corridor, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching the interaction with a quiet curiosity. The girls moved cautiously, like sparrows unsure of their perch. Julia adopted a slightly hunched posture to shield Judy, just as she had done on the street. Judy, clutching the oversized coat around her small frame, peeked at her surroundings with wide, calculating eyes. Her lips pressed into a thin line whenever Margaret spoke, but she didn't respond, leaving Julia to answer with short, clipped words. "They're like reflections," Nathan thought, his gaze drifting between them. On the surface, their features were nearly identical, the same delicate jawline, button noses, and dark, expressive eyes. However, their energy was significantly different. Julia, though reserved, carried a quiet fire, a strength born from responsibility. Judy, by contrast, seemed to shrink into herself, her silence a shield against a world that had already demanded too much. Margaret led the girls into the bathroom, her voice warm but brisk. "Let's get you cleaned up, loves. There are clean towels and some clothes, I think, will fit. Call me if you need anything." She closed the door gently behind her and turned to Nathan, her expression softening. "They're apprehensive," she whispered. "Give them time." Nathan nodded, though he felt an inexplicable urgency gnawing at him. "Did you notice their hands?" Margaret frowned. She looked as thin as reeds. Poor things must have gone days without a proper meal. "That's not all," Nathan said, lowering his voice. "Judy's fingers flinched when I reached out. It's like she's expecting something worse than rain." Margaret paused, her brow furrowing, before heading toward the kitchen to prepare something warm for the girls. Nathan remained, rooted in place, his thoughts churning. When Margaret returned moments later with a tray of soup and tea, the bathroom door creaked open. Julia emerged first, wearing a sweater and leggings that hung loosely on her slender frame. Her hair, still damp, clung to her face, and her eyes scanned the hallway with the precision of someone accustomed to danger. Judy followed close behind, wrapped in a blanket, her small hands clutching its edges as though it were armor. "You'll feel better after eating," Margaret said, motioning toward the sitting room. Julia didn't respond, but she guided Judy forward, keeping a steadying hand on her sister's shoulder. The girls perched on the edge of the couch, Judy's gaze fixed on the steam rising from her soup. She cupped her bowl with trembling hands, the heat seeming to soothe her. Nathan settled into a chair across from them, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "You don't have to finish everything if you're full," he said. "No pressure." Julia looked up briefly, her eyes narrowing as though weighing his words. "We're not wasteful," she said, her tone defensive. Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender. Fair enough. He watched them in silence for a while, studying the way Julia stole glances at Judy, monitoring every bite she took. Judy ate with careful, deliberate movements, pausing often to look at the room's unfamiliar details, the flicker of the fireplace, the heavy curtains swaying faintly in the draught. When Margaret returned to collect their dishes, Nathan noticed something he hadn't seen earlier. As Judy handed over her bowl, her sleeve slipped, revealing a faint lattice of scars running along her forearm. His chest tightened. "Judy," he said softly, nodding toward her arm. "What happened there?" The girl froze, her hand snapping back under the blanket. Julia's expression hardened immediately, and she leaned forward, angling herself between Judy and Nathan. "None of your business," Julia said, her voice low but sharp. Nathan met her defiant gaze, careful not to match its intensity. "You're right," he said after a beat. "It's not my business. But if you ever feel like talking, I'm here." Julia held his stare for a moment longer before slumping back against the couch, her guard still visibly raised. Judy didn't speak, curling further into the blanket, her face half hidden. Nathan sighed inwardly. He didn't want to push them, but the scars were a silent scream he couldn't ignore. Before he could dwell further, his phone buzzed on the side table. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the hallway. The name on the screen made his stomach sink. Lawrence Green. Nathan hesitated, then answered, his tone clipped. "This isn't a wonderful time." "Make time," Lawrence replied, his voice tense. "We need to talk. It's about the—" "Later," Nathan interrupted, cutting him off before he could continue. He ended the call, his jaw tightening as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. When he returned to the sitting room, the girls were curled together on the couch, their heads resting against each other. The fire cast a warm glow over their sleeping forms, softening the sharp edges of their earlier wariness. Nathan stood there for a long moment, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing heavily against his chest. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the scars. It was the silence. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Nathan, seated in the armchair nearest the couch, leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He watched the girls sleep, their fragile forms intertwined, as if separation were an unbearable thought. Their slow breaths accompanied the blanket's rise and fall. He had questions, but the scars, their silence, and the fear etched in their every movement demanded patience. Judy stirred first, her small fingers clutching the edge of the blanket as if anchoring herself to safety. Nathan's eyes followed her as she sat up, her gaze darting around the room, unfamiliarity sparking unease in her wide eyes. She seemed to relax when she saw Julia still beside her, deep in sleep. "Couldn't sleep?" Nathan's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Judy flinched but didn't run. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her knees, her chin resting on the top. Her dark eyes avoided his. I was scared," she murmured, barely audible. Nathan leaned back, giving her space. "Scared of what?" he asked, his tone as light as the question would allow. Judy didn't answer. Her fingers traced patterns on the fabric of her leggings. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the occasional pop of the fire. Then, softly, "It's difficult to sleep when you're waiting." Nathan frowned slightly. "Waiting for what?" Judy hesitated, her gaze flickering to Julia before dropping again. "For something bad." Her words lingered in the air, bearing more weight than a child of her age should have. Nathan didn't press further. He reached for the throw pillow on his lap and adjusted it absent-mindedly, giving her time. "You don't have to be scared here," he said finally, his voice steady. "You're safe." Judy looked at him for the first time, her eyes sharp and searching. "That's what they said before," she whispered. Julia woke not long after, rubbing her eyes and blinking at the firelight. She straightened immediately when she saw Judy awake and Nathan nearby. "You okay?" she asked, her voice firm but low, directed solely at her sister. Judy nodded, shrinking back slightly. Julia turned her attention to Nathan, her expression guarded. "Why are you still here?" Nathan offered a small smile, hoping to disarm her. "Just making sure you're all right." Julia's brow furrowed. "We're fine," she said curtly, shifting closer to Judy. Nathan studied the protective posture, the unspoken bond between them. He let out a quiet sigh and stood, heading to the kitchen. "Tea?" he called back, not waiting for an answer. As the kettle hissed and clicked, Margaret appeared at the doorway, her arms folded loosely. "Late night?" Nathan nodded, glancing toward the sitting room. "They're jumpy. Can't say I blame them." Margaret's gaze softened. "Give it time," she said again, her usual refrain. She turned back toward her quarters, but paused, adding, "Sometimes it's not about the questions you ask, but the quiet you leave for answers." Nathan let her words settle as he carried the tea back to the sitting room. Julia was awake now, her sharp gaze fixed on the door. Judy had shifted closer to her side, their shoulders pressed together like a single lifeline. "Here," Nathan said, placing 2 mugs on the low table. "It's chamomile. Good for nerves." Julia didn't touch hers. Judy reached hesitantly, her small hands trembling slightly as they wrapped around the cup. She didn't drink, only held it, the warmth seeming to steady her. "Can I ask something?" Nathan began, his voice careful. Julia tensed, but he continued. "The scars on Judy's arm. What happened?" Julia stiffened, her expression hardening into something impenetrable. Judy shrank back, her hands tightening around the cup. "We don't talk about that," Julia said flatly. Nathan nodded slowly, his hands resting on his thighs. "All right. I won't ask again." Julia appeared taken aback by the response. She blinked at him, her mouth opening slightly before shutting again. The silence lingered, and then Judy's small voice broke it. "It's not her fault." Julia whipped her head around, her eyes wide. "Judy, I heard them talking," Judy continued, her voice trembling. They said I was special because of my blood." Nathan's breath caught. "Your blood?" Judy nodded, her eyes glassy. "They wanted to take me away. The plan was to relocate me to a new family. But Julia said it wasn't real. She said it was bad." "They wanted to adopt her," Julia said bitterly, her voice sharp now. "But not because they wanted a kid. They needed her. For something else." Judy's hand shot out, clutching Julia's arm. "Don't!" Julia looked down at her sister and relented, her anger dissolving into a protective calm. "We ran away before they could. That's all." Nathan sat back, his mind racing. He didn't press further, but the fragments painted a chilling picture. Judy's rare blood, the scars, the fear. It was all connected. The silence returned, and this time it was Nathan's turn to avoid their gazes. The soft glow of a desk lamp bathed Nathan's office, the only light breaking the pre-dawn darkness. The sharp click of his pen echoed as he sat back in his chair, staring at the notes sprawled across the desk. His thoughts swirled with fragments of what the girls had revealed, each piece unsettlingly incomplete. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a while. The line clicked after a few rings. "Carter," Nathan said without preamble, his tone clipped but calm. "I need you to look into something. I'm considering a new partnership. Lawrence Green." Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I'm curious about the inner workings of his life. I want to know about his life, his family, and every aspect of his life. Everything. Carter sighed, the sound of typing filtering through the receiver. Green's been clean, at least on paper. His business ventures are straightforward, but there have been whispers about his personal dealings. Adoptions, specifically. Nathan's stomach sank. Adoptions? Yes, Carter confirmed. It seems he's been working through private channels, looking for a child to adopt. A girl, from what I can gather. But the timing feels off. I'll dig deeper and get back to you. The tension in the house was palpable. Nathan had spent the day in restless silence, waiting for updates. Margaret appeared in his office doorway, a folded piece of paper in her hand. This was in their things, she said, her voice steady but concerned. Nathan took the note and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, scrawled as if written in haste. The single word sent a chill down his spine. Victoria. Where did you find this? He asked. In the pocket of Judy's coat, Margaret said. It must mean something, doesn't it? Nathan nodded slowly. It does. And I don't think it's good. Later that night, Nathan found the girls in the sitting room, the fire casting flickering shadows on their faces. He carried a tray with 3 mugs of hot cocoa, the sweet aroma filling the air as he set it down. Thought we could all use something warm, he said, settling into the armchair. Judy reached for her mug with a hesitant smile, the first he'd seen from her. Julia followed, though her posture remained guarded. They sipped in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Nathan leaned back, letting the quiet settle before speaking. Who's Victoria? He asked softly. Julia froze mid-sip, her knuckles whitening around the mug. Judy's shoulders hunched, and her gaze dropped to the floor. She's... Julia started, her voice tight. She ran the orphanage. Nathan waited, sensing the weight of her reluctance. Julia's jaw tightened as she set the mug down. She wasn't... Nice, Julia continued, her words cautious and clipped. She made promises, but they weren't real. She lied. A lot. Judy's eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in her hands. Julia immediately wrapped an arm around her sister, her expression hardening. Is she the one who wanted Judy to leave? Nathan asked gently. Julia's eyes met his, blazing with an intensity far beyond her years. She didn't want Judy to leave. She wanted to sell her. The words struck Nathan like a physical blow. He forced himself to remain calm, his grip tightening on the armrest of his chair. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julia's gaze flicked to Judy before answering. Because of her blood. Victoria said it was special. Said people would pay for special. Judy's small sob broke the moment, and Julia pulled her closer. Nathan's chest tightened as he watched the 2 girls cling to each other, their shared pain palpable in the room. You're safe now, he said finally, his voice firm. Whatever she planned, it won't happen. Julia stared at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. You don't know that, she said, her voice wavering. I do, Nathan replied, leaning forward. Because I won't let it. The conviction in his voice seemed to ease some of Julia's tension. She nodded slowly, though her grip on Judy didn't loosen. The soft glow of a desk lamp bathed Nathan's office, casting shadows across the papers scattered before him. The room was heavy with quiet, save for the faint hum of his phone vibrating against the desk. He snatched it up, recognizing Carter's name flashing on the screen. Carter, Nathan answered, his voice steady but taut with anticipation. I've got something, Carter began, his tone unusually grave. It's about Lawrence Green. Nathan leaned forward, his hand gripping the phone tightly. I'm listening. Carter sighed, the sound of pages shuffling audible in the background. Lawrence has been quietly considering adoption. He is specifically looking to adopt a young girl. I dug deeper, Nathan, and it's not just any adoption. He is specifically targeting children who meet specific medical requirements. Nathan's stomach clenched. What kind of compatibility? Stem cells, Carter said flatly. His son Brian has been battling a severe illness. None of his family members are a match, so Lawrence started looking for external donors. A little girl's blood type makes her an ideal candidate. Nathan's breath hitched, the room seeming to tilt around him. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing to piece together the implications. You're telling me he planned to adopt her not as a daughter, but as a donor? It appears so, Carter confirmed. From what I've uncovered, Victoria, the director of the Heaven Orphanage, was facilitating this, Carter confirmed. She identified Judy, one of the children in that here, as a match, and proposed the arrangement to Lawrence. Nathan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. His pulse thundered in his ears. Does Lawrence know about Judy's history? Does Lawrence understand that Judy is more than just a name in a medical record? Carter responded with doubt. From what I can tell, Lawrence sees this as a transaction to save his son. But Nathan, he may not know the full extent of Victoria's operations. Nathan clenched his teeth. I don't care what Lawrence's reasons are. This is exploitation. I figured you'd say that, Carter said. Do you want me to keep digging? Yes. I need everything you can find, every document, every connection, and every lie they've told. You've got it, Carter said, before the line clicked off. Nathan lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling with suppressed rage. His mind flashed to Judy's quiet, tearful face, to Julia's fiery protectiveness. They were children, fragile, scared, and betrayed by every adult who should have shielded them. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Whatever Lawrence and Victoria had planned, it ended now. Nathan entered the boardroom of Green Enterprises, his calm exterior belying the brewing storm within him. The room was a glass-paneled expanse overlooking the city, the skyline glittering with late-morning light. Lawrence Green stood at the far end, his silhouette sharp against the windows. He turned as Nathan approached, his hand outstretched in greeting. Nathan, Lawrence said warmly, his voice practiced and professional. I appreciate you meeting me on such short notice. Nathan shook his hand, noting the firmness of Lawrence's grip. It was the handshake of a man accustomed to control. Let's get to it, Nathan replied, his tone clipped. They sat across from each other at the large, polished table. Lawrence gestured towards a neatly laid folder in front of him. Before we delve into the finer details of our potential partnership, I'd like to... Nathan raised a hand, cutting him off. Before we discuss business, I want to address something personal about your interest in adoption. Lawrence blinked, his carefully curated expression faltering. Adoption? I don't see how that's relevant to... It's relevant because the child you've been pursuing is Judy, Nathan said, his voice steady but laced with steel. Lawrence's face paled. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of Nathan's accusation settling heavily on his shoulders. I can see that Carter is as thorough as ever, he muttered. Nathan folded his hands on the table, his eyes locked on Lawrence. Explain. Lawrence exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Yes, I've been working to adopt Judy, but you need to understand, I wasn't trying to harm her. Then what were you trying to do? Nathan's voice was quiet, dangerous. Lawrence hesitated before reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a worn photograph and slid it across the table. Nathan picked it up, his gaze falling on the image of a boy no older than 10. Thin, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes, The child clutched a stuffed animal to his chest. "That's Brian," Lawrence said, his voice breaking slightly. "My son. He's been sick for years. We've tried everything. Doctors, experimental treatments. But nothing's worked. And then we found out about Judy. Her blood type is a match for Brian's condition. The stem cell transplant could save his life." Nathan's grip on the photo tightened. He glanced up at Lawrence, his expression unreadable. "But you decided to adopt her, not as a daughter, but as a cure." Lawrence flinched at the bluntness of Nathan's words. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "I was going to give her a home, provide for her, treat her well. She would have had everything she needed." Nathan's voice dropped, his tone icy. "Accept a choice." Lawrence looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with his wedding band. "I didn't know how else to save Brian," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "He's my son. I couldn't just do nothing." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Nathan gazed at Lawrence, his mind racing with ideas. He understood desperation, understood the lengths a parent might go to protect their child. However, that didn't justify the plans made for Judy. "She's a person, Lawrence," Nathan said finally, his voice firm, but not unkind. "A scared, fragile child who's been through hell. She's not a commodity, not a solution to your problem." Lawrence's shoulders sagged. "You think I don't know that? Do you believe I haven't experienced this every day? But what would you do if it were your child? Wouldn't you fight for them, no matter the cost?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his thoughts turning to Judy and Julia. He observed the way Julia protected her sister and the quiet sorrow that filled Judy's eyes. They were just children, yet the world had demanded too much from them. "I'd fight," Nathan said at last, "but not like this." Lawrence looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Then help me. Help me save Brian. You have the resources, the influence. You can make this right." Nathan's jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't ignore Brian's plight, just as he couldn't abandon Judy and Julia. However, his course of action had to guarantee their safety and autonomy. "I'll think about it," Nathan said, standing. "But understand this. Judy stays with me. She's not a tool for anyone's agenda, including yours." Lawrence nodded, his expression a mix of gratitude and defeat. As Nathan turned to leave, Lawrence's voice stopped him. "She's lucky to have you," Lawrence said softly. Nathan paused, his hand on the door. "No," he replied, "I'm the lucky one." As he walked out, the photograph of Brian still clutched in his hand, Nathan felt the weight of the moral dilemma pressing down on him. He would protect Judy and Julia at all costs, but he couldn't ignore the boys' desperate eyes staring back at him. Nathan stared at the photograph of Brian on his desk, the boy's frail features etched into his mind. The moral dilemma gnawed at him, growing heavier with each passing moment. He needed clarity, someone who could shed light on the dark corners of this tangled web. Picking up his phone, he dialed Carter again. "Carter, I need a name," Nathan said without preamble. "Someone who knows Victoria and that orphanage better than anyone." Carter didn't hesitate. "Samantha Brooks. She worked there for a year before she left under difficult circumstances. She's clean, though, and from what I've heard, she cared deeply about the kids. Can you get me her contact information?" "I already have. Sending it now," Carter replied, before the line disconnected. Moments later, Nathan's phone buzzed with Samantha's details. "We are curious about what time of day you are listening to this story. Before bed, during dinner, or on a free weekend? Share it in the comments below." The meeting with Samantha was arranged for the next afternoon. She arrived at Nathan's home wearing a simple coat and scarf, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun. Her eyes held a mix of exhaustion and guarded determination. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted, extending a hand. "Samantha, thank you for coming on such short notice," Nathan said, leading her into the sitting room. Judy and Julia were absent, upstairs resting after another restless night. "I'd do anything to help those girls," Samantha replied, her tone earnest. "They deserve better than what they've been through." Nathan gestured for her to sit. "That's why you're here. I need to know what really happened at the orphanage." Samantha sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as she leaned forward. "Victoria, she's a monster, Mr. Hayes. She's not just cruel, she's calculated. The adoption facade, it's a front. She handpicks children she thinks will fetch the highest price based on what wealthy families need, physical traits, health conditions, even blood types." Nathan's stomach turned, his fists clenching. "And Judy?" Samantha hesitated before answering, her voice dropping. Victoria saw her as rare. She knew about Judy's blood type and figured it would make her invaluable to the right buyer. When Lawrence came looking for a donor for his son, Victoria presented Judy as the solution. Nathan's jaw tightened. "You knew about this?" "Not at first," Samantha said, her voice trembling. "I started suspecting things when children who were supposedly adopted would disappear without any paperwork. When I confronted Victoria, she shut me down, threatened to ruin my career if I said anything. I was too scared to fight her back then." Her gaze dropped, guilt clouding her features. "I should have done more. I should have protected them." "You're doing something now," Nathan said firmly. "That counts." Samantha nodded, but the weight of her guilt didn't lift. Julia and Judy. They're remarkable girls. Julia especially. She's fierce, protective. She always had this fire in her. But Judy, she's so quiet, so fragile. It's like the world's already taken too much from her. Nathan felt his chest tighten. "It won't take anything more," he said, his voice resolute. That evening, Nathan brought Samantha upstairs to meet the girls. They were sitting on the floor of their room, sorting through a small box of trinkets Margaret had found for them. Julia's eyes narrowed immediately when she saw Samantha, her protective instincts flaring. "Who's that?" Julia asked, moving closer to Judy. "This is Samantha," Nathan said gently. "She used to work at the orphanage. She wants to help." Julia crossed her arms, her glare unwavering. "We don't need help." Samantha knelt down, her expression soft. "I understand why you'd feel that way, but I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're safe." Judy peeked up at Samantha, her wide eyes studying her face. "You worked there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Samantha admitted, "but I left because of what was happening. I wish I could have done more to stop it." Julia's facade cracked just slightly. "You knew what Victoria was doing?" "I started to figure it out," Samantha said honestly, "and I was too scared to stop her. But I want to make it right now. I promise you that." Julia's gaze dropped, her hands balling into fists. "We didn't want to leave each other," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "They were going to take Judy away. I couldn't let them." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "You kept each other safe. That's what matters." Judy leaned into Julia, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to be special," she whispered. "I just want to be normal." Nathan stepped closer, crouching beside them. "You don't have to be anything you don't want to be," he said firmly. "Not special, not different, just you." Julia looked up at Nathan, her eyes glistening. For the first time, there was a flicker of trust in her gaze. We'll keep you safe, Nathan said, his voice steady. Both of you. I promise. As the room fell into a quiet calm, Samantha reached out and placed a gentle hand on Julia's shoulder. You're not alone anymore, she said. We'll make sure of it. Julia nodded slowly, her grip on Judy tightening, and for the first time since arriving at Nathan's home, the girls allowed themselves a small sliver of hope. The following day, Nathan stood outside the Green residence, the photograph of Brian still tucked into his coat pocket. He had spent the night wrestling with the situation, but there was no escaping the inevitable confrontation. His knock on the large oak door echoed in the cold morning air. Lawrence opened it, his face lined with weariness. I wasn't sure if you'd come, Lawrence admitted, stepping aside to let Nathan in. Nathan entered without a word, his gaze sweeping over the elegant yet sterile interior. The house felt hollow, a reflection of the man who lived there. They moved into the study, where Brian sat on a plush chair near the window, his slight frame illuminated by the weak sunlight. His pale face lit up when he saw Nathan. Hello, Brian said softly, his voice thin but polite. Nathan's heart clenched. Hi, Brian. I'm Nathan. Lawrence hovered nearby, his discomfort palpable. Brian, could you give us a moment? Brian's smile faltered. It's about her, isn't it? The girl you told me about. Lawrence froze, his carefully guarded demeanor cracking. Brian. Dad, it's okay, Brian interrupted, his voice steady despite his frailty. He turned to Nathan. You're here because you don't want her to come, right? Nathan hesitated, taken aback by the boy's keen observation. Something like that. Brian's gaze dropped to his lap, his thin fingers picking at the edges of the blanket draped over him. I don't want her to come either. Lawrence stiffened. Brian, we've talked about this. No! Brian's voice rose, uncharacteristically forceful. He looked up, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't want someone to hurt because of me. That's not fair. Nathan watched the boy, a mix of admiration and heartbreak welling in his chest. Brian's words held a maturity far beyond his years, a clarity that Lawrence seemed unable to grasp. Brian, it's not about hurting her, Lawrence said, his tone desperate. It's about saving you. But I don't want to be saved like that, Brian whispered, his voice breaking. Please, Dad, don't do this. Lawrence's shoulders slumped, the weight of his guilt crashing down on him. He looked at Nathan, his expression hollow. You see? Even my son knows I've gone too far. Nathan stepped forward, his voice firm, but not unkind. Then stop now. Let Judy and Julia have the life they deserve, and focus on Brian. There are other ways to help him. Lawrence sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. I don't know if I can fix this. You can start by doing the right thing, Nathan said. Later that evening, back at Nathan's home, the fire crackled softly in the sitting room. Judy and Julia sat side by side on the couch, their expressions tense as Nathan relayed the conversation with Lawrence. Samantha stood nearby, her presence steadying. He's not going to pursue the adoption, Nathan said gently. But there's more. Judy looked up, her wide eyes glistening. More? Nathan hesitated, glancing at Samantha, who nodded in encouragement. Brian, Lawrence's son, doesn't want this either. He asked his father to stop. He's a lovely kid, Judy, and he's very sick. Judy's hands twisted in her lap, her brow furrowing in thought. Is he trying to protect me from harm? No, Nathan said firmly. He doesn't. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Julia's sharp intake of breath. Then it's over, right? We don't have to worry anymore. Judy's voice was small, but resolute. No, it's not over. Julia turned to her sister, alarm flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Judy straightened, her shoulders trembling but her gaze unwavering. "If my blood can help him, I want to do it." "No!" Julia's voice cracked as she shot to her feet. "You don't have to do anything for them. They don't deserve it." "It's not about them," Judy said quietly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's about Brian. He didn't do anything wrong, Julia." Julia's fists clenched, her voice rising. "But you're going to suffer. You're my sister, and I won't let them take you away again." "They won't," Nathan interjected, his voice calm but firm. "We would ensure Judy's safety." Julia whirled on him, her eyes blazing. "It's your responsibility to ensure her safety. How is this safe?" Judy reached out, her small hand wrapping around Julia's. "I'm doing this because I want to," she said softly, "not because they're making me. Please, Julia, let me help." Julia's resolve wavered, her anger giving way to anguish. She sank back onto the couch, pulling Judy into a fierce embrace. "I don't want to lose you," she sobbed. "You won't," Judy whispered. "I promise." Nathan watched the sisters, his heart aching. He knelt beside them, his voice gentle. "This is Judy's choice, Julia. And whatever happens, I'll make sure you stay together." Julia nodded reluctantly, her tears soaking into Judy's hair. "You'd better keep that promise," she murmured. "I will," Nathan vowed. As the fire crackled softly, the weight of Judy's decision settled over the room. It wasn't an end, but a beginning. A choice rooted in compassion and strength, one that would shape their lives forever. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines. The air was sterile, carrying the faint tang of antiseptic. Judy lay on the bed, her small figure dwarfed by the medical equipment around her. A pale blue gown hung loosely on her fragile frame, and her hands rested atop the white sheet. Nathan sat beside her, his broad frame hunched forward, elbows on his knees, and fingers laced tightly. Julia stood near the window, arms crossed, her face pale and tight with worry. Samantha lingered by the door, a silent pillar of support. Judy turned her head, offering Nathan a brave smile. "You'll be here when I wake up, right?" Nathan's throat tightened. "Of course," he said, his voice steady. "I'll be the first person you see." Julia shifted, her gaze fixed on the floor. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, almost pleading. Judy's voice was calm, resolute. "I want to help him, Julia. He's just a boy." Julia looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You're just a girl." The door opened, and a nurse stepped inside. "It's time," she said gently. Nathan stood, brushing a hand over Judy's hair. "You're the bravest person I know," he said. "We'll be right here." Judy nodded, her smile unwavering as the nurse wheeled her bed out of the room. The silence she left behind was heavy, broken only by Julia's shaky breath. "She's too little for this," Julia murmured, her voice cracking. Nathan moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's strong, Julia. Stronger than most adults I know." Julia leaned into him, her small frame trembling. "She's all I have." Nathan tightened his hold. "And you'll still have her, I promise." Hours passed like days. The waiting room was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of nurses and the low hum of the vending machine. Nathan paced, his hands stuffed into his pockets. Julia sat slumped in a chair, her head resting on Samantha's shoulder. Finally, a doctor appeared, his scrubs rumpled, but his expression calm. Nathan stopped mid-step, his heart pounding. "The procedure went well," the doctor said. "Judy's resting now. You can see her soon." Relief flooded the room. Julia straightened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "She's okay." "She's okay," the doctor assured her, with a small smile. Soft light filled Judy's room as the steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the air. She stirred as Nathan and Julia entered, her eyelids fluttering open. "Hello," she uttered, her voice barely audible. Julia rushed to her side, taking her hand. "You scared me," she uttered in a flurry of words. "Don't ever do that again." Judy gave her a worn smile. "I'm okay, Julia. I promise." Nathan stood at the foot of the bed, his chest tight with pride and relief. "You were amazing, Judy." Her gaze drifted to the window, where the setting sun cast golden light across the room. "Is Brian okay?" Nathan nodded. "He's doing better already. He wants to thank you when you're ready." Judy's eyes softened and she gave a small nod. "I'd like that." The meeting with Brian was quiet but deeply emotional. The boy, pale but with a hint of newfound vitality, sat in a wheelchair beside Judy's bed. "Hi," Judy said, her voice shy. Brian looked at her with wide, tearful eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. You saved my life." Judy reached out, her small hand brushing against his. "You're welcome," she said simply. For a moment, the room was silent, the unspoken bond between the two children filling the space. Nathan stood by the door, his gaze shifting to Lawrence, who lingered nearby. Lawrence's voice was low as he said, "I owe you everything." Nathan didn't respond immediately. He watched Judy and Brian, their shared resilience, a quiet reminder of what truly mattered. Later, as the children rested, Nathan found Julia sitting alone in the waiting room. She stared at her hands, her expression troubled. "She shouldn't have had to do that," Julia said when Nathan sat beside her. "No," Nathan agreed, "but she wanted to. That's who she is, Julia. Brave, kind, and selfless." Julia looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "I'm scared, Nathan. Scared that one day she won't come back." Nathan placed an arm around her. "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I promise you this. I'll do everything in my power to keep both of you safe." She leaned into him, her voice small. "I believe you." In the days that followed, Samantha threw herself into her work, determined to gather enough evidence to bring Victoria to justice. She pored over files, connected with former employees, and pieced together the web of corruption that had plagued the orphanage for years. Nathan watched her with quiet admiration, her dedication matching his own resolve to protect the girls. They had all come together, united by circumstance, but now bound by something far stronger, a shared purpose and an unyielding drive to make things right. As the sun set over the city, Nathan stood by the window of Judy's room, watching over the city as she and Julia quietly laughed over a board game. Hope was dawning despite their past baggage, and Nathan vowed to keep that light shining, no matter what lay ahead. The morning air was brisk, the sun barely cresting over the city skyline as a convoy of police cars rolled into the orphanage's gravel driveway. The Heaven Orphanage, once hailed as a sanctuary for abandoned children, stood cold and silent against the early light. The sound of heavy boots echoed as officers swarmed the grounds, their badges glinting under the sun. Samantha stood nearby, a file clutched tightly in her hands. She had spent weeks collecting evidence, witness accounts, falsified adoption papers, and financial records pointing to untraceable payments. It had all come to this moment. Her heart raced as she watched the officer's file inside. Nathan stood beside her, his expression a blend of calm and determination. "You did good," he said, his voice steady. She glanced at him, her grip tightening on the file. "I couldn't have done it without your help, or theirs." Her gaze shifted toward the car parked nearby. Julia and Judy were inside, Julia leaning protectively toward her sister, who was watching the scene with wide, curious eyes. Inside the orphanage, chaos erupted. Victoria's sharp voice cut through the halls as she protested, her tone shifting between indignation and panic. "You have no right," she shouted, her polished demeanor cracking. "This is a private institution." A senior officer stepped forward holding a warrant. "We have every right, Ms. Victoria. You're under arrest for child trafficking, fraud, and endangerment. A court of law can and will use anything you say against you." Victoria's protests turned into stammered denials as the handcuffs took away the color from her face. Cameras flashed as reporters swarmed the scene, their questions overlapping in a chaotic din. Nathan observed from a distance, his jaw tightening as he watched Victoria being led away. "It's over," he said quietly, though the weight of the moment felt far from celebratory. Samantha nodded, her expression unreadable. For her, maybe, but for the kids, it's just the beginning. Nathan wasted no time in leveraging his influence to restructure the orphanage. Within days, a team of trusted advisors and child welfare experts began overseeing the facility. The goal was clear: to transform it into a genuine safe haven for children, one where trust could begin to replace fear. Lawrence Green's redemption arc began shortly after. Unable to bear the guilt of his complicity, he turned himself in to the authorities. At the hearing, he admitted his actions, his voice steady, but filled with regret. "I was desperate to save my son," he said, his hands trembling. "But desperation doesn't excuse what I've done. I see that now." The court, recognizing his cooperation and remorse, sentenced him to community service and a suspended sentence. His punishment included mandatory financial contributions to the orphanage's reform efforts, a condition he accepted without hesitation. In the days that followed, Lawrence visited the new facility. He spent hours speaking to the children, offering his apologies and promising to support their futures. His efforts, though small in the grand scheme, were genuine. At Nathan's home, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in months. Judy and Julia played in the living room, their laughter filling the space with warmth. Nathan leaned against the doorway, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he watched them. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Samantha's voice came from behind him. He turned to see her standing there, her arms crossed, but her expression soft. "It does," he admitted, "but there's still a lot to do." Samantha nodded. "There always will be, but you've done something incredible here, Nathan. For them. For all of us." Nathan looked back at the girls, his expression thoughtful. "They've done just as much for me." Judy glanced up, catching his eye. She waved, her face lighting up with a grin. Julia, noticing the exchange, smirked and whispered something to her sister that made them both giggle. Samantha stepped closer, her gaze warm. "You're a wonderful man, Nathan Hayes, don't forget that," he chuckled softly. "I've made my share of mistakes, Samantha, but for once I feel like I'm getting something right." As the evening drew near, Nathan gathered everyone in the dining room. Margaret had insisted on setting the table with plates of food, and the girls were already arguing over who got the last roll. Nathan raised his glass, prompting the room to quiet. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice strong but full of emotion. "And to the people who make them possible." Judy and Julia raised their glasses, juice boxes really, and clinked them together with dramatic flair. "To family," Julia declared, grinning at Nathan. Nathan's chest tightened, warmth flooding through him. "To family," he echoed. The night was filled with laughter, the scars of the past not forgotten, but no longer defining. Outside, the world continued to turn, but within the walls of Nathan's home, there was peace, hope, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The day had arrived, marked on the calendar with quiet anticipation and unspoken dreams. Nathan stood in the courthouse hallway, the hum of muffled conversations echoing off the polished marble walls. Judy and Julia were seated on a bench beside him, their legs swinging over the edge as they clutched each other's hands. "You nervous?" Nathan asked gently, kneeling to their level. Julia shrugged, her expression carefully guarded. "A little." Judy, ever the quieter of the two, looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "This means we get to stay forever, right?" Nathan's chest tightened, and he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "That's exactly what it means." The doors to the courtroom opened, and Samantha stepped out, her professional demeanor softened by the warmth in her gaze. "They're ready for us," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Nathan stood, holding out his hands to the girls. Julia hesitated for a moment before taking his left hand, and Judy quickly grasped his right. Together, they walked into the room. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, sat at the bench. Papers were neatly arranged before her, but it was the way she looked at Judy and Julia that set the tone, a mixture of understanding and encouragement. "This proceeding is to finalize the adoption of Judy and Julia into the custody of Nathan Hayes," the judge began. Her voice was even but warm. "Mr. Hayes, do you understand the responsibilities and obligations that come with this role?" Nathan's voice was firm. "I do." The judge's gaze shifted to the girls. "Judy, Julia, do you both feel safe and happy with Mr. Hayes?" Julia nodded, her grip on Nathan's hand tightening. "Yes, ma'am." Judy's voice was a whisper, but her words carried weight. "He's the best." A soft murmur rippled through the room, and Nathan felt a lump rise in his throat. After a few formalities and signatures, the judge smiled. "It's official. From this day forward, Judy and Julia Hayes, you have a home and a family." Julia's usual stoic demeanor cracked as she flung her arms around Nathan. "Dad," she whispered fiercely. Nathan froze for a heartbeat, the words sinking into his chest before he hugged her back, his voice thick with emotion. "That's right, Julia. Always." Judy pressed herself into his side, her small voice barely audible. "Dad." The word broke something inside him, something he hadn't realized had been locked away for so long. That evening, the house was alive with celebration. Margaret had outdone herself, stringing fairy lights across the dining room and baking a cake that towered precariously with layers of frosting and sprinkles. "Careful!" Judy squealed as Julia leaned too close, trying to swipe a fingerful of icing. Nathan stood by the table, watching the girls laugh and play, their joy infectious. Samantha moved beside him, a glass of wine in her hand. "You look happy," she said, her tone teasing but genuine. "I am," Nathan replied, his voice soft. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again. A family." Samantha glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're a natural at it. They adore you." Nathan turned to her, catching the faint blush that crept into her cheeks. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You give me too much credit." "I don't think I give you enough," Nathan said, his voice low. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the room seemed to fade. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared bond forged through months of struggle and resilience. Before either could speak, Julia's voice interrupted. "Dad, Judy's trying to take the first slice." Nathan chuckled, breaking the moment as he turned toward the girls. "All right, you two. Let's settle this the civilized way, with a knife." The night continued with laughter and teasing, the kind of simple happiness that felt revolutionary after all they'd endured. As the girls finally drifted off to sleep, their giggles fading into the quiet hum of the house, Nathan stood by their door. He watched them for a long moment, their faces peaceful and free of worry. "You did good," Samantha's voice came from behind him. Nathan turned, finding her leaning against the hallway wall, her arms crossed loosely. "We did good," he corrected, a faint smile playing at his lips. She tilted her head, her expression softening. "You're going to be okay, Nathan. All of you." "For the first time in a long time," he said, stepping closer. "I believe that." The quiet stretched between them, not awkward, but filled with unspoken promises. As Nathan reached for the door handle to close it softly, Samantha turned to leave. "Samantha," he called quietly. She paused, looking back at him. "Stay a little longer," he said. Her lips curved into a small smile. "I'd like that." Together they moved to the sitting room, settling into the comfort of each other's presence. The house, once filled with silence and loneliness, now felt alive, a testament to new beginnings and the family they had built, one piece at a time. 6 months later, the green mansion buzzed with life. The once quiet halls now echoed with laughter, playful arguments, and the patter of small feet. Outside, the sprawling garden was filled with colorful decorations for a special celebration, Brian's 10th birthday. Julia and Judy darted between tables laden with treats, balloons swaying in the breeze above their heads. Margaret directed the caterers, her usual brisk efficiency softened by the warmth in her eyes. Nathan stood near the center of it all, watching as the children, Judy, Julia, and Brian, shared jokes and smiles, their bond unshakable after months of healing together. Brian, though still thin, had regained color in his cheeks and a mischievous glint in his eye. He and Julia had developed a sibling-like camaraderie, often conspiring to tease Judy, who now responded with equal doses of laughter and mock annoyance. "You've outdone yourself," Samantha said, stepping up beside Nathan. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her auburn hair catching the golden sunlight. Nathan glanced at her, his expression softening. "I had some help." She laughed lightly. "Still, this is more than just a birthday party. It's proof of how far you've all come." Nathan's gaze shifted to the children. "They're incredible, aren't they? All 3 of them." "They are," Samantha agreed. Her eyes lingered on Nathan for a moment. "And so are you." Nathan turned to her, his voice dropping to a quieter tone. "I don't think I would have made it here without you." Samantha tilted her head, her smile growing. "I think you underestimate yourself, Nathan Hayes." Their conversation was interrupted by Judy, who came running up with a grin. "Dad, Brian wants you to light the candles." Nathan's heart swelled at the word, still new, but already deeply rooted. "All right, lead the way." The garden fell silent as everyone gathered around the table. Brian sat at the head, the cake before him, a tower of chocolate and cream adorned with 10 sparkling candles. Nathan struck a match, lighting them one by one as Brian watched with wide-eyed wonder. "Make a wish, buddy," Nathan said, stepping back. Brian closed his eyes tightly, his face scrunching in concentration before blowing out the candles in one determined breath. Cheers erupted, and the children clapped excitedly. "Did you wish for a pony?" Julia teased, nudging Brian. Brian grinned. "Nope, better than a pony." "What's better than a pony?" Judy asked, genuinely curious. Brian leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "A sister who saves your life." Judy blushed, her smile shy but radiant. "That's a pretty good wish." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden was bathed in the warm glow of string lights. Conversations hummed softly, the air filled with the scent of flowers and freshly baked pastries. Nathan found himself standing near the edge of the garden, the lights casting flickering patterns across his face. Samantha approached, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. He chuckled, shaking his head. Just thinking about how much has changed, how much I've gained. Samantha nodded, her voice soft. You've built something beautiful here, Nathan. A real family. He turned to her, his expression serious but gentle. It's not just me, Samantha. You're a part of this too. The girls adore you. He hesitated, his voice catching slightly. Samantha's gaze met his, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. Nathan? I love you, he said simply, the words steady and certain. I didn't think I'd ever say that again. But here I am. And it's because of you. Her breath hitched, and she took a step closer. You're not the only one who feels that way. For a moment, the world seemed to fade, the sounds of laughter and chatter softening in the background. Nathan reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. The night ended with one final photograph. Under the canopy of lights, Nathan, Samantha, Judy, Julia, Brian, and even Lawrence stood together, their faces alight with laughter and joy. Margaret snapped the picture, stepping back to admire her work. Perfect, she declared. It was more than perfect. It was a portrait of resilience, hope, and unconditional love. A family forged not by blood, but by choice and unwavering bonds. As the children chased each other across the garden and the adults lingered in quiet conversation, Nathan looked around, his heart full. The Hayes mansion was no longer just a house. It was a home, a house of laughter, love, and light, where the shadows of the past had been replaced with the brilliance of new beginnings. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.